Sometimes the way that Jesus appears in the Old Testament scriptures is that he's implied. There's an implication of Jesus. So what does that look like? Well, maybe you read the Old Testament and you see stories of despair. You see prevailing sin. You see some kind of yearning or longing. You see narratives that cause a longing for wholeness and restoration between God and man. Can I just tell you what that's supposed to bring up in you? It's supposed to bring up in you the need for someone who will deliver us. It's supposed to bring up within you something is off. Ever since the opening pages of Genesis, something has been off. And so, man, even when you don't see Jesus explicitly in the Old Testament, there is oftentimes sections in which Jesus is implied in the text when you read of just sin and brokenness everywhere. The second way that we see Jesus is sometimes he's patterned. Sometimes Jesus is patterned. Another word for this is a fancy word called typology. And so Jesus is patterned. So a story like Joseph in Genesis, at the end of Genesis, is an example of this. Joseph is a pattern or a type of Jesus. So Joseph, in his story, he is rejected by his brothers, but ultimately what? He delivers them. He delivers his brothers. They come to him, they plead for mercy, they plead for provision, and what does he do? He forgives and delivers them and gives them a great inheritance. You know what that's a shadow of? Christ. Maybe a different, we're going to look into more of this next week, but another kind of pattern that we see is in the Exodus and the Passover. That is implemented in Exodus. It shows us the need for a deliverance. And so we're going to talk more about that next week because Jesus says in verse 2 here, you know that after 2 days the Passover is coming. Hey, it's not an accident. It's not an accident. Can I just tell you that? This isn't God up in heaven saying, what are some key dates in human history that we can send Jesus in and maybe just kind of coincidentally match these up with these things? No, not a coincidence. Jesus is the fulfillment of these things. So sometimes he's implied, sometimes he's patterned, sometimes Jesus is promised. You got one I and two P's so far. All right. Sorry if you're OCD and you're like that doesn't all match, but sometimes Jesus is promised. By the way, we've seen this already in Genesis chapter 3. You read the story of the fiery furnace. There's a fourth person in the fire. They throw 3 in, and they turn around and they say, there's someone else in that fire. Christ. When in Genesis, I would say in Genesis chapter 1, God the Father says, let us make man in our image. Jesus is present. He is eternal. Our God is triune. Joshua chapter 5, the angel that Joshua wrestles with. Another word for angel is simply messenger.